And here's FDR proposing that we amend the Constitution to the United States to expand our definition of rights. Here he is.
In our day, certain economic proofs have become accepted as self-evident. A second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed.
Okay, so number one, he's saying we want to establish these rights, and we also want to make sure that nobody can discriminate against you in your exercise of them. What are those rights, Franklin Roosevelt?
Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation.
Now, having the right to a job that earns enough to actually raise a family could be played out one of two ways, or both. Number one, you can talk about the minimum wage. But number two, what if capitalism has failed, or what if stupid public policy like free trade agreements have failed us, and there's no good jobs to be had? What if the Republicans continue to allow McDonald's and Walmart and whatnot to game the system and pay people so little that they qualify for welfare? That's not a fully remunerative job. Well, if it's enshrined as a right, then Walmart wouldn't be able to do that. McDonald's wouldn't be able to do that. And when there are people who are unemployed, rather than sending them an unemployment check, which John Boehner cut off a year and a half ago or 13 months ago, instead of putting people on unemployment, you could put them on a government job. You can give them a decent job that actually pays well. So the government becomes the employer of last resort when capitalism fails. That's the first. Next.
The right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living.
Now, keep in mind, when Franklin Roosevelt said this, about a third of the American economy was agricultural. So he was talking to a hell of a lot of people. I mean, there were more farmers than there were machinists or even people working in car factories. But that said, I think that we need to return to something like that. We have industrialized agriculture, and it is causing massive suffering among our food animals, which includes those that secrete milk and lay eggs. Massive suffering. It's harming the public health. We're doing it with this whole antibiotic thing in a way that is causing antibiotic resistance, which is going to be the next major epidemic that we will have no way to deal with here in the United States. It already is antibiotic-resistant bacteria as a result of factory farming. We're destroying our soil. We have this started in the 80s when Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Act and allowed these giant industrial agricultural combines to start buying up farms. I grew up in Michigan. I grew up at the south end of Lansing, Michigan, and literally a half a mile from me where the farmland began. And I had friends. I went to school with kids who were farmers. And they all owned their own land. This was in the 50s and 60s. By the late 80s, pretty much everybody I knew who had been a farmer now had their farm had been bought by one of the big ag companies, and if they continued to farm that land, they did so as employees of that big company or as contractors to that big company. Let's break those back up. Let's go back to agricultural practices which are actually more productive, not as profitable for Monsanto or Dow, not as profitable for the big ag billionaires, but more productive for you and me. So that was number two. Number three is
the right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad.
You have a right, if you're running a business, not to get squashed like a bug by a monopoly like Microsoft or Comcast or Verizon or whatever it may be. You have a right to not have monopoly in your face. If we put this into the Constitution, Reagan couldn't say, oh, yeah, we're going to let these monopolies take over every industry in the United States. We're going to let, all the radio and TV stations in the country be owned by two or three companies. No, he couldn't do it. because you have a right to have competition.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-536-2370.
It's not just that you have a right to have competition. You have a right to be the competition. More of these rights right after this. Back to this conversation that we were having in the United States in the 1940s with Franklin Roosevelt, that everybody knew we were having a conversation about, and then, we sort of stopped talking about it. I mean, World War II happened, yeah. And then Harry Truman, who was, he was an okay president, but he wasn't the brightest bulb in the tree. And then the Republicans took the House and the Senate for 2 years, 1946-47, or 47-48, the election of 46. And screwed everything up from Taft-Hartley on down. They did such a terrible job that the Republicans didn't again take the House of Representatives for over 40 years. Americans figured out what the Republicans were all about. But we never got back to the conversation, which is what should be a right and what should be a privilege in the United States. And those things that should be rights, they should be absolute rights, which means that we, the people, will make sure that they get accomplished if capitalism fails to do so. To quote Roosevelt, the spokesman for power and privilege, right? The shills for the Koch brothers and the other right-wing billionaires in this country, they will tell you that the purpose of our country is to have an economy, and the purpose of the economy is so some people can get rich. I would say not true. I would say the purpose of an economy is to do what's best for the country. And some people getting rich is a side effect of it. So anyhow, we've talked about having a right to a job, which means the government becomes the employer of last resort. Keep in mind, you have a right to, your child has a right to an education. Now, yes, the Republicans are trying to chop away at that, with voucherizing schools and charter schools and private schools and everything else. But still, it's at law that your child has a right to a free public education, a quality education. So FDR is saying you should have a right, not just to a job, but to a job that pays enough. You should have a right to, what else did we cover? To have a successful farming enterprise, in other words, to be a small business person and to run a farm. And you should have the right to run a business without it being destroyed by fat cats, by monopolists. Here's what's next.
The right of every family to a decent home. The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health.
Housing and health care should be rights. We have millions of people in the United States living on the streets. We also have millions of empty homes and housing units. You think we could get these two things together? And health care, every other developed country in the world says that health care is a basic human right for their citizens, except the United States. In the United States, health care is an opportunity for people like Rick Scott to get rich. Now, granted, Rick Scott did it in part with fraud. His company was convicted of the largest Medicare fraud in the history of the United States, and he went on to use his millions to get himself elected as governor of Florida. You can fool some of the people all the time, apparently. But that's, our consensus now is that health care is so that people can get rich, whether it's an individual star surgeon or whether it's a big health care company. Here's what's up next.
The right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment.
There you go. And we started down that road with Social Security. We took it a large step forward long after FDR was dead, when Lyndon Johnson in 1964 or 65 introduced Medicare and Medicaid. But now the Republicans are trying to roll those back, too. And finally,
the right to a good education.
Right. Which is, arguably we've had. But let's enshrine these things in law. There's nothing radical about any of these things. In fact, according to the UN Declaration of Human Rights, everything that FDR just said is a right available to every person in the world. Now, the problem is the UN doesn't have any enforcement power. If they did, they could change our laws. But isn't it time for us to have this conversation about, why do we allow big banks to exist? Is there some public purpose that is served by them? And if there isn't, let's stop allowing it. For example,